welcome everybody. Just wait for some more people to join us. So there's a few people coming on board now. Right, we'll get underway. So my name is Philip Aldridge, and I'm Executive Director of HASNET, Health and Safety Association. So welcome to today's webinar. Kia ora, tēnā koutou, nau mai, haere mai. So just in terms of the format today, so we've got myself doing a brief intro and I'll be the MC. Then we've got 4 speakers. So we've got Olivia Lund from Dun Cultural, John Fitzgerald from WorkSafe, John Etwell, organisational psychologist and Institute of Organisational Psychology, and Judy Curry from Otago University in a day job, but also president of the New Zealand Occupational Health Nurses Association. Ooh, bit of a handful. So they'll do a bit of intro to themselves as well. So just a bit of background to where we're at. So welcome to everyone today. We hope to have it in Queenstown today, but and we're going to record it too. But I haven't been down there, so it's a nice weather. Anyway, but and I feel sorry for people in Auckland. But anyway, we'll do a virtual one today, so it's great to have everyone here. So a bit of background for me, it'll kick things off. So we'll get the slides up. Oops. So some of you may have seen this slide before, but certainly we know from the workforce barometer survey about 70% of people in workplace experience some form of physical or mental illness or health issues in the last 12 months. So it's quite a large proportion. And some of you may have seen this slide before, but essentially it's saying that throughout the day or throughout the week or throughout the year, people vary from sort of a unwell, perhaps, and struggling to more thriving. So it's quite a continuum from really doing well and from day to day, depending on circumstances and other things. And this slide too has been around for a while, but it's quite useful to understand really the different options that workplaces have and how to do things. Certainly is a protect space, which is really where ideally most people need to go in terms of getting in the game, in terms of managing the risks and managing people in the workplace. Supporting people, which is more like an EAP, so if someone's potentially got some issues or needs support. Reclaim was where a lot of organisations focus, basic construction, mental health, first aid, resilience training, and then as a foster. So really, my view is it's great to have all those programs, EAP, mental health, first aid, resilience training, but really we need to think about in terms of both individual and workplace appropriate things. Sorry, I'm stick through. Sorry, the slides aren't on the screen, sorry. See what I can do. Whoops. It's only the last slide anyway, John. So thanks for that. So in terms of we need to move our emphasis to the tech space. So that's where the leadership comes in, the workplace comes in. So everyone has a role to look after their own mental health, but really under the HASWA, leadership and the organisation has a role about how we can actually improve mental health in the workplace. And that leads to productivity improvements for less workplace illnesses, better work engagement, less turnover staff, and attracting people to your workplace. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to the next speaker, who's Olivia. So I'll share my slides. I can figure out how to do that. Sorry. Why isn't that working?
I think if you stop sharing, Philip, and then I can.
Here we go. Sorry. Sorry about that. I realised halfway through I'm only sharing half the screen. Sorry about that. Over to you, Olivia.
Kia ora koutou, everyone. Thanks, Philip, for that introduction. As Philip said, we've been running a whole series of these seminars around the country in Wellington, Christchurch and Auckland, and we did hope to run this in person in Queenstown as well, but unfortunately because of COVID we haven't been able to do that. It is fantastic, though, that we are able to have this webinar online, and I know that there are people across the country who are linked in today to see that. So hello and welcome to all of you. A particular shout out to our colleagues and friends in Auckland. I know that you guys are doing it tough up there, going into the 5th week of lockdown, which must be absolutely trying. The experience that I am having with my colleagues and clients that I'm dealing with is the motivation is really starting to languish now. So in terms of working through today, what I did in getting ready for this, and it was a few months ago that we did our first series, was just actually looking at, well, what is the media commentary out there? And I think all of you won't be surprised that it's everywhere at the moment in terms of discussion around mental health, mental well-being, stress, anxiety, burnout, depression, suicide, and lots of questions around, well, whose responsibility is it? Is it personal responsibility of the employees or the workers? Is it the employer's responsibility, or is this a government issue? Where do you start, and what does good look like? And so for me, as part of pulling this together with Hazans, it was actually overwhelming for a lot of organisations to think, well, where do we start? So one of the themes that has run through these sessions has come out of one of these pieces of commentary and media coverage, and that's a piece by Francois Barton, who's the Executive Director of the Business Leaders Health and Safety Forum. And he had quite a nice metaphor that resonated with me as to how to reframe your thinking around mental health in the workplace. And he started off his article with saying, imagine a business where live electrical wires dangle from the roof and staff regularly suffer shocks and burns from coming into contact with them. And in fact, they get burns so much that they organise for a nurse to come into site every Wednesday to dress the wounds. And they offer subsidised health insurance to cover private treatment for those wounds. But they never fix the wires. And so Francis goes on, surely that scenario sounds crazy. No business in New Zealand is going to behave like that, bandaging people up and then putting them back into that same environment that they're working in. Sadly, when it comes to dealing with mental wellbeing and mental health at work, that is the scenario that a lot of organisations and workplaces look like in New Zealand. And so what today is focused on is prevention and protective measures. So what can organisations do to prevent their workforce, their workers coming into contact with these dangling wires? And it's more about being a fence at the top of the cliff rather than being an ambulance at the bottom. So I'm going to cover in very high level the legal framework and touch on the key obligations that organisations have in respect of managing mental health and wellbeing in the workplace. Now, it is a really high level summary, but it's important that we're all coming from the same starting point when we hear from John Fitzgerald as the regulator and what WorkSafe's view is on that, but also the practical insights that we're going to get from both Judy as an occupational nurse and John Eatwell as an organisational psychologist. So the first piece of legislation I wanted to cover, obviously, is the Health and Safety at Work Act. And what I've done in setting up this presentation is actually looking at, well, what does health mean? And health gets forgotten a lot when people are talking about health and safety obligations under HSWA. So health actually is defined in the Act, and it means physical and mental health. And so what I've done when looking at, well, what is the primary duty on organisations under HSWA in terms of health and safety management, wherever health is referenced, I've put mental health in front of that. So it's really clear what an organisation's responsibility is. Now, I'm hoping that everyone on this call, it's not a surprise that employers and organisations who have responsibility over work and workers have an obligation, have a duty under HESWA to take steps to ensure, so far as reasonably practical, the mental health of workers who work for them, workers who are directed or influenced by that organisation, and any others who might be impacted by the work that your organisation does. There is a primary duty to ensure their mental health is protected. And so that primary duty obviously is limited to the extent that the organisation has the ability to influence and control matters that give rise to risks to mental health. And quite often, you know, you'll hear or read commentary, or clients will say to me, surely I'm not responsible for what, you know, happens in my employee's life outside of work. I've got no control and influence in what happens there. But the reality of the situation is that a worker and an employee doesn't leave their personal life at home. So when Olivia turns up to work, it's not work Olivia, it's personal Olivia, and it's work Olivia, and vice versa. When Olivia leaves the workplace and goes home, she takes all the work issues with her. So it's not as easy as drawing a line in the sand and saying, I'm only responsible for what happens in the workplace and whatever impacts that personal, that employee has in their personal life. I'm not responsible for that. There's nothing I can do about it, because when someone brings in those issues to the workforce, they generally will have an impact on others in the workplace and what is going on. So just expanding on that primary duty and what it looks like in practice. So here I've said the primary duty requires organisations to, one, provide and maintain an environment that is without risks to mental health. So that's going back to that dangling wires piece. What are the factors? What are the things within the working environment that give rise to a risk to mental health for that workforce? Secondly, providing safe systems of work and making sure that they are maintained so they don't give rise to risks to mental health. And then thirdly, looking at, well, what information, training, instruction or supervision is necessary for people to ensure that their mental health is not impacted on. And lastly, having a system in place that you're monitoring the mental health of your workers. What are the conditions like? Are people trained within your organisation to know when someone's mental health is being impacted or their well-being? So just like safety risks, you go through the same process in terms of ensuring you're meeting your primary duty of care and looking at, well, first of all, planning. So identifying and assessing, well, what are those risks and hazards to mental health? Are they environment factors? Are they people factors? Or are they the work that gives rise to a risk? And then going through a process and looking at ways that you might be able to eliminate or minimise those risks to mental health. Or on the flip side, which John will talk to you about, it might actually be looking at, well, what actually tools do I need to give the workforce in terms of prevention or protective measures so they aren't harmed by those hazards to mental health and risk in the workplace. And then checking, so monitoring, are those measures that you've got in place, are they actually effective? Are they doing what you expect and want them to do? And if they're not, making changes. So this continuous improvement cycle. Now I've included in there, and this is defined under HESWA, that hazard it also includes a person's behaviour, where that person's behaviour has the potential to cause harm, death, injury or illness to a person. And so an obvious example of that would be bullying or harassment, where you've got a worker who is subjecting others in the workplace to that. That is a hazard and gives rise to a risk to people's mental health and wellbeing in the workplace. The other legislation, obviously, that sets out the obligations on employers to protect people's mental health and wellbeing is the Employment Relations Act. And this isn't a new obligation. So most employment agreements will include an express obligation on an employer to provide a safe and healthy workplace for their employees. Even if there isn't an express provision in an employment agreement, there still is this duty. It's implied by common law into those employment agreements and contracts. There's also the good employer obligation, and that's under the Public Service Act and Local Government Act, where public sector organisations and government organisations are required to provide safe working conditions and equal employment opportunity for their workforce. Now, I have included here a reference to case law, which is going on, nearly 20 years now, as to say, well, this isn't a new concept in terms of an employer having an obligation to look after people's mental health and well-being in the employment sphere. So that's a case of the Court of Appeal, and in there the court found that an employer does not guarantee to cocoon employees from stress and upset, nor is the employer a guarantee of the safety of the health of the employee. So whether workplace stress is unreasonable is a matter of judgment on the facts and the context of that organisation, and obviously the work that's being performed. It will depend on the employer's obligation will obviously depend on the particular circumstances. So what is actually required from a contractual obligation under the Employment Relations Act is what are reasonable steps which are proportionate to the known and avoidable risks to mental health. We have had a few recent cases in the Employment Court and the Employment Relations Authority which have considered whether issues around a person's mental health or mental illness and how that interacts with performance issues. And in this case that I've got here, FGH, it's a government department, and it's not an uncommon situation that we see where there has been an employee who has been put on a performance improvement plan, and that has arisen because their work has not been meeting the expectations or standards of that employer. And they've been put on a performance improvement plan, and without giving proper consideration to that employee's own mental illness, in that case they had a diagnosis of anxiety and depression, and the employer in that case failed to take steps to actually understand, well, is the poor performance and the poor behaviour that that employee is experiencing at work a condition or a consequence of their diagnosed mental health condition. And in that case, they failed to clarify that, and the outcome is that they went through a performance improvement process. That employee struggled with that process, and so rather than actually meeting the objectives and improving, their behaviour actually deteriorated, and then they were terminated. And so the court in that case actually found that the employer's actions were unfair and the termination wasn't justified because they failed to give proper consideration and weight to, well, actually was that employee's inability essentially to meet the employment standards that were required as a result of their mental health condition. The other piece of legislation employers should be mindful of when dealing with mental health and wellbeing in the workforce is the Human Rights Act. So it is unlawful for employers to discriminate on the grounds of disability, and disability includes psychiatric illness, intellectual or psychological disability or impairment, or an experience of mental illness or mental health problems. So we should all be looking at mental health and mental illness in the same way that we would for physical disability, or if you've had a worker who has injured or harmed themselves at the weekend at sport, and then what reasonable accommodations need to be made for that worker to come back to the workforce so they can return to work. So similar, not the same considerations, but quite often mental illness or mental health won't be looked at the same way by an employer as physical disability in terms of making reasonable accommodations for them. Under the Human Rights Act, it is prohibited for an employer to discriminate on the grounds of mental illness or mental health. And so where discrimination might occur is if an employer refuses or admits to provide the same terms and conditions of employment, or whether there has been a dismissal or action has been taken by that employer on the basis of that employee's mental illness or mental health condition that has a detrimental effect on either the employee's employment, their job performance, or their job satisfaction. So that is quite a wide ambit there in terms of what could amount to discrimination. Obviously, if they retire or cause their employee to retire or resign as a result of their mental illness or mental health condition, that would be discriminatory action as well. The last piece of legislation to consider, and it's not the only one that governs this, is the Privacy Act. So obviously health information is regarded as personal information under the Privacy Act. So if you've got someone who has a mental health diagnosis or mental health condition, that is health information, which is their personal information. So there will be obligations under the Privacy Act, but also a number of the health codes that apply as to how that information is to be obtained by an employer and what it's used for. And there's also limits on disclosure. So making sure that someone's personal information is not shared further than it needs to be. And also when you are making requests of an employee as to their mental health or mental illness, making sure that you don't unreasonably intrude on their personal affairs. So it's a really delicate balancing act to get right. And that's probably why it is wise to seek assistance, say, from an occupational nurse or a registered medical practitioner as to how you navigate that and what you need to know and what's going too far. Just wrapping up, obviously, the key takeaways from me is that health includes mental health. And so when you're looking at what your health and safety obligations are, both under HASWA, but also at employment law, it includes mental health. And there is a legal duty to take steps to, just like you would a safety risk, prevent harm to people's mental health and wellbeing in the workplace. Not only is it good for business, and there's been lots of research and commentary around productivity and absenteeism, it's actually just a good, genuine thing to do in terms of making sure people are the best version of themselves that they can be. So that last point there, fix the wires, fix the wires, fix the wires. It's me.
Thanks, Olivia. So I'm John Fitzgerald from WorkSafe New Zealand. I've heard that that presentation. That's the fourth time now, and every time it's the same with all these presentations. Every time I've heard something slightly different, and learned something new from it. So always useful. Let me share this with you. Hope maybe Olivia, can you give me the thumbs up if you can see that, because I can actually see you on my screen. Yeah, that's good, thank you. So kia ora tātou. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Fitzgerald. I am the lead for mentally healthy work at WorkSafe New Zealand. My background is I'm a clinical psychologist. I've worked in adult mental health and drug and alcohol services, child and adolescent mental health. Been qualified for 33 years, so I bring a traditional, I guess, sort of traditional mental health approach to this area of work. So this is quite a steep learning curve for me. I've been at WorkSafe for about 15 months now, and I know when I started with a focus leading the mentally healthy work team, which was a new team, it was a new team that's been set up, I thought, there's five years work here or 10 years work here, and I think every week that I spend here adds another year to the work that I think needs to be done. There's just so much interest and so much potential to improve the lot of workers and of New Zealand in general. I've got a dozen slides. I may not get through them all, but I hope they're in enough there's enough detail in the slides that you will be able to make sense of them. Just to start by reiterating Olivia's point that when you look at the Health and Safety at Work Act, you'll only see the word mental twice, and that's both times you'll see it is in the glossary. The first time is when it refers to the potential risks associated with exposure to hazardous substances, where you'll see that there are mental as well as physical risks associated with exposure to HAZ subs. Not particularly helpful to me or my team, quite a specific area. The second time you'll see it mentioned is when they define, or when the Act defines what health is. And you will see there that it says that by health we mean physical and mental health. So every time when you read the Health and Safety at Work Act, you read the word health, you need to be thinking about mental health. So mental health here is hiding in plain sight. It is one of the primary focuses of the Act, but it's something that that has not always been on people's radar, including actually on WorkSafe's radar. It's always been an area of work at WorkSafe, but until my team and a specialist team of health inspectors and the team of human factors ergonomics specialists were set up, psychosocial factors weren't a primary focus or a significant focus of work for, or area of work for WorkSafe. But if you've looked at the work-related health information that's available on our website, you may have seen this diagram, which is the burden of harm from work-related injury or ill health. And you will see from here that that mental ill health is associated, or the cause of, 17% of disability-adjusted life years, based on WorkSafe's own analysis of the data. I would invite you to think a little bit about that. There's a couple of things about this diagram that's sort of interesting, I think. First of all is above the mental ill health section of that pie graph, you'll see acute injury, and above that catastrophic harm. And these account for under 12% of the disability adjusted life years which are associated with work-related harm or injury. So these are when people have lose an arm, or a tree falls on them and they get run over by a truck. And this is traditionally what we think of as being safety at work, physical injuries. You'll see that all the other areas are health related. So we've got carcinogens, we've got MSDs, respiratory, hearing loss, cardiovascular. These are all health related. In fact, 88% of the burden of harm from work-related injury or health is to do not with catastrophic or traumatic injury, but other vectors. If you look at the 17% that's associated with mental ill health, the criteria that we use to identify that are basically diagnosable disorders. So they looked at anxiety, depression, and trauma-related injuries. Of course, mental health is much broader than that. That is just a traditional view about what mental illness or mental health is about. But if we think more broadly about mental health and well-being, you might say, well, as I would say, that actually all of the other areas have mental health and well-being components to them. So I don't know how you can have an acute injury or come to catastrophic harm without there being some psychosocial element to it, without it being distressing for your workmates, without it causing you maybe anxiety or some other psychological harm, without it impacting on your family. But the same for cancers and respiratory problems and cardiovascular problems. So my view is that mental health is everywhere. If we look at the segmentation insight report that's on the WorkSafe website, where they break down the psychological harm that results that people experience at work, what they found in that was 2019 piece of research. They found that 20% of workers reported elevated levels of depression from work-related factors in the previous 12 months. 30% reported anxiety problems, and 60% reported problems of stress. So once we get outside, these are self-report, but once we get outside a very strict diagnostic criteria, then actually we find people reporting much broader sense of psychosocial distress or well-being issues. The final comment I'll make on this slide, it relates to sort of mental health being everywhere, and this is why mentally healthy work is so important. That if you think about people who might get hit by a log at work, for example, you're either going to be working in the forestry industry, probably, or you're going to be driving a truck that moves the logs from the forest to the port, or you're going to be a port worker. So if you're going to have a bad interaction with a log, there's probably limited places that you can have that experience. But if you're going to experience stress in the workplace, if you might experience bullying in the workplace, you could be any worker working in any industry anywhere in New Zealand. And this is why mentally healthy work is so important, is because this is about everybody. So this is a definition that we use at WorkSafe about to help us to define mental health. We use the World Health Organization's definition, and we've also got a mentally healthy work position statement at WorkSafe. But let's just focus on the left-hand side of this screen. So this is a definition we use. Mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to her or his community. First thing to notice here is that there's no mention of pathology, that we're not talking about depression or anxiety or trauma here. We're talking about something that's ubiquitous, that everybody has mental health, and that health and mental health are it was Brock Chisholm in 1954 who was the first Director General of the World Health Organization, who said that there is no health without mental health, that these are intimately connected. But things to notice about this definition is that it's about a state of well-being. So mental health is also is subjective. It's about a person's perception. That it's about realizing potential. And the slides that maybe you will see when you look at Philip's original first few slides up, you'll see that there's slides in there about thriving and about potential. That stress is part of ordinary everyday life, and being healthy is about being able to cope with those stresses, and a focus on being productive and fruitful and working in your community. So it's about putting mental health and health in context. So this is why mentally healthy work is so difficult, is because it's so complex and so broad. That's why it's difficult to get hold of. It's a big beast. So how does WorkSafe approach this? Well, generally WorkSafe has three roles. We aim to be an effective, WorkSafe are New Zealand's primary health and safety at work regulator. We're not the only health and safety at work regulator, and actually starting at WorkSafe, I've realized how many regulators we have in New Zealand. We seem to regulate a lot, I think. But anyway, WorkSafe is New Zealand's primary health and safety at work regulator. We have three main sort of roles. The first is regulatory effectiveness. We have to be effective as a regulator. Only a small part of this is about enforcement and prosecution. That there are lots of other things that we do that speak to this role of regulatory of being an effective regulator. But the other things, and I think in mentally healthy work, given the complexity and size of the challenge here, are equally important. And Olivia's mentioned these already. We also have a role in harm prevention. So if you think people are harmed, they're harmed because of exposure to risks. Well, if we can manage the risks more effectively, then less people are going to be harmed. But how do we even prevent the risks from becoming reified, is there some way that we can identify risks before they appear and prevent them from becoming part of the work landscape? So really what we want to do is to swim as far upstream as we can in terms of harm prevention. And that involves system leadership. And the way we do this is by enforcing where we need to. But in the area of mentally healthy work, it's primarily about engaging and educating. So this is a difficult area of work. There's a few bullet points on the left-hand side of this screen about the mentally healthy work team that I lead, which is quite small. We are only 5 people. When we're currently going through a recruitment process to replace one of these people who has resigned, and I think that we have a team of 5, but we could easily do with a team of 55. This is not a job that we can do on our own, which is why it's really important. why I really appreciate the opportunity to speak at this HASAN's webinar is that we rely on other professional groups that are linked in and associated with health and safety at work, while we also link in with New Zealand Institute of safety managers. We also link in with health and safety reps. That you know, this is something that we cannot do on our own, that we need to work together and support each other. There's so much work to do. But as you can see on the right hand side, that guided by this the mental health continuum, seeing mental health as all the way from being unwell to thriving, which is functioning well, which is sort of health plus in a way. The primary tools that we use are engagement and education. So we are, while we will regulate in terms of enforce and prosecute, and we're getting better at doing those things since this is developed as a focus for WorkSafe. Our primary route of intervention is about getting alongside businesses, getting alongside workers, getting alongside professional organisations and associations, getting alongside organisations that have skin in the game here, and supporting them and working with them to educate the sector. When I think about why, if we go to a business and talk to them about why mentally healthy work is important, we need to be able to make the argument that it's good for business, which it certainly is. Productivity increases when you have a mentally healthy workforce. That staff retention, staff recruitment becomes easier. So it's good for business. It's also a legal obligation, of course, as Olivia's pointed out. But I think it also is there is a moral and ethical obligation for employers to look after their workforce, that they provide the work, they structure the work for people to do, and they have a moral and ethical obligation, I think, to do that in a way that's not knowingly going to harm people. And if it does harm people, they need to do something about that. So I think they also have this sort of ethical obligation. So how do we structure our thinking about what mentally healthy work is? You may have come across these items in the WorkSafe Victoria guidance on the cause of workplace mental injury, but you may not have only seen them here. The Canadian standards from 2013 also, or 2014, also had a very, very similar list. If you look at the New South Wales Code of Practice around psychosocial harm in the workplace, you will see these items. If you look at the new ISO 45003 guidelines on management of psychosocial harm in the workplace, you will see that there's a very similar list as well. And what it does, these items are can be generally divided into three areas. So we think about three areas of psychosocial risks. The first is about work design, and this is how the work is done. And items here include things like low control, job control, low control over workflow, high and low job demands, people not being clear about what their job is, people working in a remote or isolated working environment. So the first is about how the work is, how it's designed. The second area is about the work environment. Certainly there are physical things in people's work environment that makes work difficult, but it can also include overcrowded work environments, for example. And the third area are the social organisational contexts of work, and this is where the sort of the bullying and harassment and the issues come in, and where the sort of the relationships that people have in the workplace can have a detrimental effect on people's levels of stress at work. The common, a fairly common mediating factor here is workplace stress. So a lot of these things contribute to high levels of workplace stress. So why might stress make a difference? I mean, if you imagine, for example, high or low job demands, people have high job demands, not enough time to do their work. What they might do is they might do extra hours, which means that they potentially become fatigued. They might rush, so they might not remember to put the guard down on the machine because they have to get through a certain amount of work in a fixed period of time. So high levels of workplace stress can often be the mechanism through which harm happens. And that stress can be driven by a range of factors, including these ones listed here. So how do we address these? So my last couple of slides focus on workplace culture and leadership in the workplace, and I just want to make a couple of points about a couple of these slides. The first one here is, again, this comes from the Segmentation Insight report, where there are over 1,000 participants representing a range of companies across a range of sectors in New Zealand, working sectors, and also individual workers. And what they did was divide employers down into 4 main categories in terms of their orientation or the maturity of their safety culture in the workplace. And they were able to divide these into, first of all, to 2 main categories: passive or dynamic workplace cultures. So the dynamic workplace cultures were those that were active in their engagement in health and safety and positively encouraged people to take responsibility, workers to take responsibility, and as a business they took responsibility for looking after the health and safety of workers. The others were more passive. So these were places where health and safety at work was just seen as common sense, and therefore no additional focus was required. But I'd like to talk about the all talk little walk category, because that's one that particularly interests me. So 27% of the businesses they thought fell within this category. The reason why I focus on it is that it might only be 27% of the businesses, but actually it's 36% of New Zealand's workers work in these businesses. So of the 4 categories, it's the biggest single category. These tend to be big businesses, well-established businesses, businesses in health and education, for example, public sector. And these are businesses where at a very senior level, the organisation has a very positive sense about what health and safety is. They advocate for health, safety and well-being, but where there are difficulties pushing and supporting that message down through the ranks. So at some point in these organisations, you get a point, you reach the tipping point where the pressure from the top and needs driven productivity needs, for example, coming up from the bottom, sort of cancel each other out. We've just done a piece of work about what good looks like, and have got some information and some data about the struggle of middle management, about how difficult it can be to balance sort of the policies and directives that are coming from the top around health and safety and well-being, and actually trying to implement that in on the workplace, on the shop floor, as it were. So this speaks to the culture of the workplace and how leadership is really important in driving some of these positive changes, that it's a good thing that leadership take this seriously, but we still need to work on how that message gets translated and transferred down into down onto the shop floor, how it gets operationalized, and you know, clearly we need to be getting alongside businesses and along workers to help them to make this transition. I mentioned this slide and then I'll skip to my last slide, I think, because I'm just aware of the time. So as well as the significance of leadership, I think the other thing is that I've sort of alluded to is the importance of positive workplace culture. So you may have leadership, you may have advocates and champions in the workplace who really understand health and safety and well-being, who have a good sense of what's involved here, who are very positively motivated towards health and safety and well-being, and caring for each other. But you just don't have an environment that is able to support that. I think I think this is a really nice resource, the Government Health and Safety Lead's 2019 document on positive workplace culture program, the agency planning workbook. And what they've done is they've tried, they allude to the Public Services Commission's model standards. And I think these are an interesting place to start. So these are the bullet points down the left-hand side. So you'll see that the first bullet point is about providing strong leadership. And clearly that's important. It needs resourcing. People need to be able to walk the talk, though, as well. The bottom one is about trusted policies and procedures. There needs to be a framework within which health and safety and well-being can operate, and policies and procedures can provide a framework for this. But if they're just documents and they're not dynamic and they're not alive, then they are relatively unhelpful. What's the most important aspect, I think, in building positive workplace culture has to do with fostering good workplace relationships. It's about engaging with workers, understanding for workers what the most important factors are, and what the difference between workers imagined and workers done, that actually we need to talk to workers about what a positive workplace culture will look like. Now, John Eatwell is going to talk more about this, and I will give him the stage in just a moment. But what I'd like to do is sort of an entree to John's presentation. I will show you this, which is my last slide. And there's the other reason why I'll mention this slide is because John refers to it, but in the other presentations, I have never got as far as actually showing this slide. So this is my last opportunity to do it. It's a New Zealand study, Flourishing in New Zealand Workers. It was conducted by folks up in Auckland about 5 years ago. And what they did was look at a whole range of data from the Sovereign Wellbeing Survey, and they looked at measures that they thought were metrics to do with or proxies for flourishing in the workplace. If we can look at the second box down there, that if people are allowed to use their personal strengths, they're 18 times more likely to flourish in the workplace than people who are not able to use their personal strengths. So understanding for businesses to understand their workers and understand what they're good at and give them an opportunity to do what they're good at. So this is about the match between the person and their job and responsibilities, 18 times more likely to flourish. So now we've looked at the second box, let's go to the top box. So how do you allow people to use their personal strengths? Well, you have to build awareness. So we have to communicate with workers. We have to understand what their personal strengths are. So high levels of awareness of personal strengths mean that people are 10 times more likely to flourish than those who have low level awareness of their strengths. So we talk to our employees, talk to workers, understand what their strengths are, and then allow them to use their strengths. We go down to the bottom two boxes. I think the third one down is a clincher, that people who feel highly appreciated at work are 30 times more likely to flourish. It doesn't take a lot, really, once you understand people and once you allow them to use their strengths to show appreciation. And it doesn't necessarily mean financial appreciation. It is just acknowledgement. Reward is not just about financial reward. It is also about just being respectful, treating people well, recognizing their contribution. So I will leave you on that point. I think, how we build positive workplace culture, we have to engage with the workers. We have to, with each other. And that's what, we're all workers. We engage with each other. We are kind and respectful and generous.
Thanks, John.
Thank you very much, John. Nice lead in there. Where am I?
Glad you got the final slide on, John.
Yep. So tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Tapi Wainuku tōku maukau, ko Wairau tōku awa, ko Eatwell tōku whānau, ko John tōku ikora, nō reira tēnā koutou katoa. So John Eatwell, organisational psychologist by background, and hopefully you're going to pick up on John's theme there around how do we actually create these organisations where people can flourish. And I guess what I'd like to do really is draw a link really between engagement, which people are probably quite familiar with, and actual wellness at work. And may seem like a long bow to draw, but actually the UK government's been looking at how do they measure or how do they create useful metrics around how the government's doing. Up until now, it's sort of been GDP, but actually they're looking at wellness of the British population as being a way of actually measuring how well the government's doing, and the New Zealand government is doing the same. And as part of that, they've been looking at actually engagement in the workplace as a driver of wellness. And if we look at what things actually make us engaged at work, they're actually, pretty similar to the things that also make us well and make us resilient. So if we look at things that make us engaged at work, there's generally something about values and meaning. Why do we do this job? Does my job matter? There's something about development, as John was just saying there. What are my strengths? Do I know what my strengths are? Do I have the opportunity to learn and grow in those areas? And a lot of good psychology sort of happened either before ethics committees or after CAT scans. And now we can put you in a CAT scan, we can teach you some stuff, and we can actually see what's happening inside your brain. And your brain is releasing endorphins when we learn stuff. So actually, we're a bit happier than we normally are for about 2 weeks after we learn something new. So our brain is reacting to learning stuff. So if we can do that on an ongoing basis in our work, then people are not only happier, they're also more well. There's this idea about a sense of community that we like the people we work with, and John referred to that in terms of the social environment. Do you go to work looking forward to catching up with people and sharing what's happening, and is that a psychologically safe environment, or are we going to work seeking to avoid people who we think might be critical of us or are not enjoying what we do or our company? The fourth factor there is a performance culture. We like high performance, and as John's slide there, actually, if we're being appreciated for our strengths, so positive reinforcement, then we certainly enjoy our work much more likely to be flourishing. But also, we actually like things to work. And if we've got organizational systems, your computer system, all the things around us, the people around us are all working well together, then actually we tend to trust the business more and actually be happier as well. The last factor there is an interesting one, leaders' positivity. But it's quite interesting. If you look at the research on leadership over the last 50 years, energy levels and positivity have come through as consistent themes around what drives effective leadership. In fact, some Swedish studies thought it was actually one of the 3 genetic components to leadership. But what we know now, as we'll talk about later on, is actually, yes, some of positivity, happiness is probably genetic, but actually at least half of it is actually things we can manage and alter. So these are the things that create engagement at work, and we can see the middle column, which you may well recognize as the 5 ways to well-being, actually line up pretty nicely, don't they? So giving is actually, what are we doing to contribute to others, which sort of highly aligns to the sense of purpose. Keeping learning is obviously aligns very nicely with development, the connecting with others, a sense of community. And I know, there's been increasing talk around this, around the lockdowns. We know loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 17 cigarettes a day. So, if we're lonely, that has a big impact on our health and happiness. And we can be lonely at work, even though we're working with other people there. So do we feel connected to the people around us? Do we feel as though they like us and want to interact with us? There's this element of stretch. And obviously, lastly, there's also this of taking notice. We need to be active in ourselves and be mindful about what's happening around us. We think this stuff is new, but in fact, there was a Confucian saying, which was 600 BC. If you want to be happy for an hour, take a nap. If you want to be happy for a day, go fishing. If you want to be happy for a week, learn something new. If you want to be happy for a month, get married. If you want to be happy for a year, inherit a fortune. And if you want to be happy for life, then give. And, it's what we call hedonistic adaptation, that actually, when we do learn something new, we're normally happier than we normally are for about 2 weeks. If we get married, we're actually about happier than we normally are for about 2 years. We go back to our normal level of happiness. if we win lotto, we're happier than we normally are for about a year, and then we go back to our normal level of happiness. So a lot of these circumstantial things actually are temporary, but it seems to be, if we can associate what we're doing with giving, or we can associate what we're doing with how it contributes to others, that does have a long-term impact on our health and well-being. And the last column is resilience, and Sana Melanin and Katharina Narswell and Joanna Kuntz at University of Canterbury have done a lot of work on resilience, particularly after the Canterbury earthquakes, and found again the huge correlation between engagement at work and resilience. So we know these things are integrally linked. And when we look at the research on engagement, actually, as John was alluding to, probably about 80% of the variance in engagement is actually explained by your relationship with your direct line manager. So these are not the people at the top of the stack. These are the team leaders or leading hands, or the people you're directly reporting to. So 80% of engagements are that. 15% is the senior leaders, out there talking about visions and values, talking about health and safety and the importance of business. 5% is the company brand. Are we proud of who we're working for? So a huge part of engagement is around that relationship with that line manager. And in fact, again, going back to the work they're doing in the UK, one of the big studies they had was, how do we increase the wellness of our British population at work? And there was a huge study with all sorts of things like respiratory that John identified earlier, musculoskeletal or whatever else it is. And at the end, they asked this clinician, who was the leader of the project, if there's one thing you could do to improve the wellness of the British population, what would it be? And her answer was actually to improve the relationship of people with their line manager. So that seems to have a huge impact on people's wellness. How do we create environments where people are happy and well and are doing well? And if we look at some of the research around interacting with your line manager, we can see some of those dangling wires that Olivia was referring to before. This is Australian research, but I suspect it's probably pretty similar to here. So 60% of people in the study said that interacting with their line manager damages their self-esteem, because their manager didn't remain calm and constructive, didn't ask their opinion when there are things come up that the person was technically able or knowledge able to contribute to, didn't ask for clarification when the person went to them with questions. They didn't even ask for clarification, they just answered or gave solutions to problems. It didn't help them solve a problem. So this is the stuff which, these are the dangling wires of a leader's interaction with their staff. And as John was saying also, actually, this is not just about making things better for the staff member. Actually, also this relates to productivity. In fact, 83% of the leaders who were effective in their interactions were the ones who actually interacted effectively with their staff. Only 2% of the leaders who didn't interact well had high productivity. So it seems to be there's this real win-win in this relationship, and we can build better relationships with our people. We can be more effective, and then that has a huge impact, not only on people's well-being and mental health, but also their productivity. And I guess, one of the key things I would say, if we look at the research around what is really effective in building those better relationships and supporting team members, it's this coaching thing. How do we actually spend more time with our people? How do we help them prioritize? How do we help them stretch and grow and learn and do better because of that? So the research, this is New Zealand research. People who are coached report being more likely to attempt challenging job demands, which is that stretch element we talked about earlier. They're more likely to be engaged at work and happier, and they're likely to have lower levels of stress. So all these things contributing obviously to mental health. The interesting thing is actually what's called the coaching ripple effect. Actually, the people who are coached, the people they interact with, are also happier. So we have this flow-on effect of coaching, and this, again, leaders positivity wise, this is similar to what we'll be talking about there. So if the leader is positive, in fact, that's measurable at 2 degrees of separation. But certainly, so if we've got leaders coaching their people, actually the people they're interacting with, including their families and other workers, are also measurably happier in their work. So, and this seems to be a pretty consistent theme in New Zealand, that people want more contact with their leaders. And in fact, the frequency of catch-ups has gone from once every 13 weeks to once every 6 weeks over the last 4 years. So there seems to be a real theme that actually people want more time, and organisations are providing more time with managers and their staff to build that relationship and to create better outcomes. So this is a little bit of evaluation we've done over implementing coaching within organisations. And so typically we're looking to obviously get the senior leaders coaching for a start. So trying to get the executives to do that. So, and through doing that, they can role model to the rest of the organisation, providing some obviously some knowledge and skills and frameworks in terms of courses, and also setting organisational goals. And what we found through that is, yes, the role modelling works. So again, the similar this ripple effect. If we can get the executives coaching, then the people under them are more likely to coach, and the people under them are more likely to coach. So we can see a ripple effect there, but also the skills transfer. So if we can build the skills of executives, again, the people under them tend to learn from them through the coaching and adopt the similar sorts of skills. And what we can see there is actually when we build the frequency of coaching and skills, we can build high levels of engagement. And the interesting stat there is that there's 0.7 correlation between frequency of coaching and engagement. So that's huge. I mean, that's effectively, if you were developing a questionnaire, you'd expect to get a 0.7 correlation between the questionnaire being administered over 2 points in time. So that's a huge relationship. And that really goes to the research on trust. That seems to be that it's the frequency of contact that builds trust. It's the quantity of time, not the quality of time. We've heard often it's actually the important thing is the quality time, not quantity time. Actually, there's no research that I've ever seen to say that. It seems to be all about the quantity of time. And one last just little slide on this. If we look at the factors, this is a Gallup survey, and I'm not advocating Gallup over anybody else, but they were one of the originals. So they looked at over 270 different behaviours at work that would drive engagement. And these are the top 12 in terms of the ones that were related to how engaged people were. So I just want you to have a quick look at that. And on the chat group or the chat option, can anybody say, if you're coaching your people, I would say you can achieve 10 of those 12 things. There's probably 2 there that if you're coaching your people, you're not necessarily going to hit. So on the chat group, anybody willing to offer some suggestions as to the 2 that you couldn't achieve if you're coaching your people? No guesses? 10? Ah, yes, good work. 9 and 10. Oh, there we go. Yep, Cheryl Adams, well done. And Lee, yep, fantastic. Cool. Yeah, so basically, yeah, so 9 and 10 are the 2 there. So are your fellow employees committed to doing quality work? Yeah, that's not you're not going to do that via coaching. That's performance management or encouraging people or giving them systems that work. So yeah, so certainly we need to do that as well. And the number 10 is best friend at work. So that is, are we creating positive communities or teams where you can have a best friend at work, and through that we can I guess create the opportunities for people to have best friends. But the other 10, if we're coaching our people, we can do all 10 of those. Do you know what's expected of you at work? Do you have the materials and equipment to do your work right? At work, do you have the opportunity to want to do best every day, which is relating to those strengths again? Have you received the recognition and praise, which is that stat that John talked about there, 30 times more likely to be flourishing if you've had some good recognition? Does someone seem to care about you as work? Is there someone who encourages your development? Again, going back to that strengths development, do your opinions seem to count? Does the mission or the purpose of your company make you feel a job is important? That's that purpose. Can we see that link through? Has somebody talked about your progress, and have you had opportunities to learn and grow? So you can see here, if you're coaching your people, you should be building this relationship, which creates high levels of engagement and high levels of wellness, and helping people manage their stress and those factors as well there. The second thing I want to just touch on is actually this leader's positivity or energy. So there's a lot of research now showing that actually if your leader's in a good headspace, your people are likely to be much happier as well. So yeah, and again, this was the original research suggested this was one of the 3 genetic components to leadership. So the research now probably suggests that probably around half of your personal happiness is probably genetic. The other 41% is probably the things you can do to manage yourself. So this is getting enough exercise, eating properly, thinking about your purpose, taking some time off, making sure you're not clearing emails all day and all night, you're actually having some time off. But also organizations, how are they protecting their leaders? Are they allowing them or facilitating them to work ridiculous hours? Are they encouraging them to have time off, have breaks? Are they sending them emails at late at night? And so again, how is the organization actually helping leaders be in a good headspace and facilitating that so they can have a positive impact on their people? And we know again, John's sort of already alluded to this, but if we can build these positive environments, if the leader's in a good headspace, so they're addressing poor behavior, they're encouraging good behavior, they're focusing on what's going right and all those things, then we can generate teams that we have a positive environment, a positive psychosocial environment. And we know in that environment, our brain works better, we're better able to process information, we're more creative, and people do better in those environments. And if we can create those environments, that's also where people are much more likely to seek support. So as a recent survey by Synergy Health looked at, if you had a mental health issue or you had mental stresses and strains, who would you talk to at work? Yes, a trusted colleague, 46%. So if we're building teams, building environments where you feel safe to talk to your peers or other people, then actually that's the environment where people can start to bring up issues and seek support. 26% would talk to their manager. I suspect that'd be higher if the manager's coaching them, because you'd have more of a trusted relationship. Slightly less would talk to EAP. So your manager's probably a more preferred option than EAP, and HR was 4%. And the good news is that 86% of colleagues felt equipped to help. So if we can build up people's the relationships within teams, they feel able to support their peers, which is fantastic. And we also know if we can build these teams where there's a high degree of psychological safety, if we care about the people that we're working with, then we also tend to have less accidents. We're more likely to report hazards. we're more likely to work cooperatively with peers, which creates a better environment, not only for to be productive and be mentally health, but also to avoid physical hazards as well. So thank you very much. I'll hand over.
Thank you, John. That's pretty good. Thank you both, Johns. Just take a 2-minute break. So if you can grab a drink or stop or whatever else before Julie starts. Conscious we've been sitting down for over an hour. We've got another session, then it's a Q&A. So if you just take a short break and talk amongst yourselves. There's actually one question while we're just waiting before Julie kicks off that we can probably answer before Julie gets going. Essentially, the question is maybe for Olivia initially, and I can see that, Olivia. Essentially, a process where a staff member is being bullied. What is the threshold I could consider to be assessing the harm? I'm not sure if you see that question, Olivia.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can see that one or not, but the one I can see is about the aggressive behaviour considered a hazard in the workplace. That one, yeah, it's going to be exactly the same process as you would adopt in any disciplinary, because you've got a person and employee involved. You would just be linking in as part of your decision making as the impact of that person's behaviour and actions on others in the workplace. And what suitable sanctions and options are available to correct that behaviour or prevent it from occurring are available.
Cool. Thank you for that. Over to you, Judy.
Thank you very much. And we'll start with Mate Korero Ka Ora. My Maori is not brilliant, but it's through conversation comes well-being, and this comes from one of the things from the Mental Health Association, which is actually having Mental Health Awareness Week coming up the week of the 27th of September. So I'm going to do a big plug for that because the resources are all there. So please, the more people who do that get involved this year, the better. Now I am just going to see how I get this to move forward. I'm Judy Curry. Quite a few people hopefully will know me. I'm hoping there's a good Central Otago group there. I am an occupational health nurse and have been involved in occupational health and safety for 30 odd years now, which is a long time. And I also have been a mental health promoter. So this is one of the things I'm incredibly passionate about and really enjoy doing these workshops. I also work for the University of Otago at the moment, and I am their occupational health and wellbeing coordinator, and that's across staff and students. So we have a small staff of 12,000 on any one day that work here, and about 20,000 plus students. So it's always a challenge, always a bit of fun, and I hopefully will try and pull the threads of the previous speakers together to talk about how you can actually do this stuff, because it's a challenge on every day. And at the moment we are focusing on, we've sort of focusing on two things. One is on the well-being of the staff with the various in and out of lockdowns. We have got staff in Auckland and Wellington Christchurch and here in Dunedin and in Invercargill, as well as vaccinating. So today's vaccination clinic, so I've left the team downstairs vaccinating, and we are trying to do our best to get New Zealand vaccinated. So that's our big thing at the moment. There's some interesting things. We did have that discussion about line managers this morning, and so there's quite a few things that I'll refer to along the way. One of the things I think is really important to workplaces is to find out who is going to be your health and wellbeing navigator. It's really hard for workplaces. One of the conferences that we have a health and wellbeing advisor. She's just been on an Australian conference this week. One of the things that talked about was the line manager being, what was the role of the line manager? And they very firmly said that the role of the line manager was there to support the people and not be the person to fix it. And it just kind of rings with, who have you got that you can go to as a business. So I'll try and give you some ideas, plus I really advocate for a trusted professional in your organisation, or somebody you have connection with that you can get to help you. Somebody who's got skills, who's got training, and who knows, where to go when things go astray. So just talking about this two-way relationship of health on work and work on health, and we've, previous speakers have talked about this, and psychological risk can be part of your work, and we can bring risk to work. So it's one of those things. Many businesses have lovely things that they don't think about, and I think it's really important that you know your people, you know what's going on in your business. And for those lovely businesses in the venture capital of the world, you have businesses that often have people who do, it's not easy. We have trying to live often without family around. That's a major issue. Then we have these lovely customers that come, and they often will do things like, I've often talked about the screaming, that, adventure, excitement, and people scream a lot. Unfortunately, our brains don't differentiate between screaming for good and screaming for bad. And so for the workers, that can be quite exhausting. And so I know a lot of businesses have worked that you don't sit on the front line all the time. But yes, know what your business is, know what is up, what's affecting your people, talk to your people. Again, this has been talked about quite a lot. So, it is one of those things that you do need to talk to your staff. One of the other things that I found along the way, which was interesting, was a transport business, and the drivers were finding that going to farm gate, they were often the only person that talked to the farmer, and the farmer would, talk about all the things that were going wrong for him, and they were incredibly upset about this, and what do we do with it? And what we developed was a process, so that if the driver had gone to a farm, he was worried about what the farmer was talking about, he would go back to the dispatcher straight away, and the dispatcher would get the rural support trust to go and visit that farm. So some practical, think about what you've got in your area and what are the practical things that you can do to help support the community around you, because that sense of community is absolutely important in getting us through the next bit. The face of New Zealand has changed dramatically with COVID, and I think we have to develop a sense of community. We need to work together, and we need to support one another. And it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be any easier over the next little bit. COVID has amplified what was already there, but it's like, going from the little speaker about this big to the great big boom box And if you're locked down, it's like, you know, the subs in the back of the car whipping around the, so it certainly is amplifying things. There was a little bit of research in that conference from the UK, and actually, interesting enough, there was no change in the safety issues throughout the whole COVID experience in the UK to date, but there was around health and mental health. So that was just an interesting little thing that came through. What we see in workplaces is it's about the behaviour. You know, people have all those things that happen at home, yes, and they do bring them to work. And then we have all the things that happen at work. And John have talked about this. What we see often are those behaviours in the workplace. And this is where if you've got a good trusted professional in your workplace and you've got a good HR team, and you've got good managers with who are trained, then you can actually do some really good things. I do often talk about one incident where we had somebody who was described as being grumpy, extremely grumpy. And there was a nurse and I in that workplace at the time, another nurse, and we were doing some work, and I said to her, everybody who comes in to see me talks about this person being grumpy. And unbeknownst to us, there was a whole other process going on behind there. But I said, when you see him, just do his blood sugar. So we did his blood sugar for him, and to only discover it was so high, and we shot him down to got him to his GP straight away, and he had diabetes. So sometimes some behaviours have physical means, and sometimes they are mental health means. And so we need to be kind of aware of everything and make sure that people get to the right place, and their GP and all their health professionals probably the best. If people are displaying symptoms, make sure they can get to their GP. And sometimes that is, especially around the rural areas, if they don't have time, if they come back late, making sure that they can get there, that they can come in earlier, that they can afford to go to the GP, which seems to be an ongoing issue at the moment. So all those sorts of things, because GPs have good mental health support, especially in the southern region. They have 6 sessions available to all their patients in a mental health contract with their WellSouth. So yeah, do get people to the right place. We look at mental health at the university, and I use this now because I think, you know, there's been some really good work done with the university about this, and it's been done over about the last 10 years, I would say. It's been going on. So it's getting well honed, about a 3-level approach, which is that primary intervention level, and then the returning to work when things are not so good. So the very beginning part of it, the prevention and promotion, is about what can we do. We defining what is good work, getting good policies and procedures in place, you know, internal supports, good working conditions, transparency and accountability. And again, I just want to reiterate that effective management, having good line management. One of the issues that's come up over the lockdown period is we did do some surveying, and you know, it's the expectations of the manager versus the ability of the person to do the work. The other thing that we did last year over lockdown was actually provide a phone support for people at home. We just put out if they would like some support. We were happy to provide a phone service, and so our occupational health team used to phone people, and we'd talk to people, and they'd say, oh, just call me once a week, or can you call me twice a week? And for some people who were incredibly lonely, we actually phoned them every day to make sure they were all right. So I think, you know, how do you support your people? and that one-on-one phone call rather than the, you know, all around the coffee table was often quite good for people, that they could talk about things. So who have you got that can do that? And again, finding a relationship with a professional person. And I, you know, for me, we've got 340 wonderful occupational health nurses around New Zealand. Yeah, it's always a bit of a plug there. So that's, you know, really good. Get people involved. One of the things we are doing now is we have gone to wellbeing champions. So these are people within each sort of area, roughly, who can. We don't want them to do anything as far as you know, fixing it for anyone, but we want them to be the knowledge base, and they are the go-to person. They will know where to navigate people to get help. So, and promote. So Mental Health Awareness Week, they'll be the promoters of that. At the moment, they're the promoters of vaccination. So we have not appointed them without some sort of process. There's been a process. There's been training. We've done 3 lots of training with them. One that we find incredibly useful, which is professional and personal boundaries. So they know what those professional and personal boundaries are. The other one's about supporting people. We tend not to do mental health first aid, which the Australians apparently found quite interesting, was that we do a supporting people, and then we do one for managers, which is how managers support people. And so far we've had some quite, you know, it seems to be working, and we've had good feedback and evaluation from that process. So it's just one of those things. There are heaps of really good resources around. Mentally healthy workplaces, wellbeing. Just be really careful about who gets involved. And I mean, the HASIANS register again provides, you know, who you can get, who's credible. If you want, always get references about where people have worked before, but there are really good resources online. If we look at the, you know, the Government Health and Safety Lead, Business Leaders Forum, Francois, and Working Well, if you're a smaller workplace, Working Well provides the most incredible resources to actually work things through with your workplace. So really do something around that. Staying at work, this is sort of that next level. This is where we do have some workshops. We have what we call a RAP workshop, which is one where people go to actually, how do they manage their own well-being? And though there often is a lot of people with you know, mental illness or mental challenges around a workplace, will go and just develop some strategies and tools around them. Trying to find the workplace, how do we support people internally? What can we do that actually means that people can stay at work? We do a lot of work because we do have a good team. We work with people. We often provide sort of stay at work plans for people. Sometimes that requires some really interesting discussions with managers and with HR team about how we can do that. So we've had people who have taken on a frontline job and then haven't been able to do that frontline job all the time, and it may be that we need to take them away from the front line for a little bit. Some people who don't manage so well on certain days, we quite often accommodate by reducing hours, providing flexibility, so that they have half day or a whole day off in the middle of the week to go and, you know, attend to their own. Perhaps they've got appointments and other things on. Managers don't need to know the detail, and I think that's one of the difficult things for managers sometimes, and they're getting better at those conversations. They don't need to know the detail, but they need to know what's capable, what's workable, and it's like a physical problem. We just need to keep working through that. Again, just take care when inviting people into your business. There's been some horror stories in there. and I have been part of some that have really caused harm when they've gone in and they go in and do this rather large, sort of, this is all about awful things that have happened or talked about mental health, and there is no support behind that. So if you're going to go something big, wonderful, and in your workplace, make sure you've got backup behind it. So one is where they had, the high profile speaker had gone in and talked about, especially about suicide. And this had created quite a bit of angst, or more than angst, just stress actually, that next week with the workers. And they had actually, it just was luck that we were there on the Monday, and we actually we were supposed to be doing health monitoring, but we ended up supporting the people more than health monitoring, and we got the counsellor in by about 10 o'clock in the morning. On Monday, we had the counsellor in on site to help people work through what they had experienced, and it just brought things up for people again. So do be careful, do talk about it, and I mean, some things are brilliant, but other things just are not. So just trying to look at that. 3 themes that have come through with me with wellbeing over the last year are the sense of inclusion, sense of humanity, and a sense of community. These are really important to people, and keep building that. It is quite difficult in these times, but that sense of community, if we can keep building that, I think that is the way we'll get through the next 12 months. 5 ways to wellbeing, definitely already been brought up. Some sort of EAP or support services. Some smaller businesses just know who their local people are. It might be that you've got the I'm thinking of the CAB, that you've got some sort of information area in your town where everybody can go, community law. So getting a list of what's local, what's free, what's available is incredibly important, and have that up on the wall. Put it up in the toilets. People read the back doors of toilets when they're all really helpful things. 1737 is an amazing service and needs promoted. Doesn't really, because it's very busy, but 1737 is a free, anyone can call or text that and get a counsellor on the end of the line, and we promote that all the time, and you'll actually see Ashley Bloomfield with his 1737 badge on from time to time. So that is again one of those great things. We then come to the really tricky end of how do we get people back to work when they have had that letter from the GP that managers get that says somebody is off work because they are stressed. And it's probably, I think, most managers' worst nightmare is when that letter arrives, because one, you feel like, did I create that stress? Did my workplace create that stress? And now what do we do? And back away. This is where you really do need somebody to help you through that. It supports you and supports your worker. So just trying to get people back slowly, gently, and you can have really good success if the right supports are there and people feel like they can trust where they're going, they can feel like they are valued, and that nobody's, that they are part of that community. So yeah, it's those small steps that it's the small things that make the big difference. It really is.
Got time.
Yep. I'm just on the last one. So some good resources, which are in the PowerPoints, and also, again, shout out to Mental Health Awareness Week. Use all the resources, and I'm sure it will help. There we go.
Thanks, Judy. Great. Thanks for that. So we're going to have 10, 15 minutes of questions if people want to stick around for those. So thank you, presenters, Olivia, John, and Judy. and Olivia. There's one question here for you, Olivia. One's come. So start putting your questions in by the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. There's one there for you, think, Olivia, around moving to hot desk. The decision was made without any staff consultation. And the health and safety rep from my sector had no idea when I approached him. What is your view of hot desks?
Well, I'm not going to share my view of hot desks because that doesn't matter, but I think it is a growing trend and something that is here to stay with flexible and remote working. It creates other issues, obviously, in the current climate that we are all working in with COVID and control measures around that. But putting that aside, from pure employment approach, where there are any changes to obviously the working environment or the way that someone works, you should be consulting and engaging with your workforce on that, not only to get buy-in from the workforce, but also to make sure that you're not blind. So you're considering what the impacts of those changes will have and what additional measures need to be put in place. Does that change have an impact on someone who might not be able to manage that, or working in open plans, all those sorts of things? Yes, consultation and engagement is really required in those circumstances to make sure it's done well, but it probably isn't a legal requirement potentially. You don't need consent of the workforce to move to hot desking, arguably. Yeah.
Cool. All right, this one I'll probably go to you, Olivia, and one of the Johns. So you've got a staff member who's gone missing in action, we're my age in lockdown, no phone contact, no email. I've asked for a sick note so we can talk to a professional. That starts getting reformed, doesn't it, Olivia?
Yeah, again, that's just, you would approach it in the same way as if a worker hadn't turned up to work for whatever reason, whether it's sickness or something else, or abandonment. So there's quite a high threshold and process you would need to go through. You'd need to make multiple attempts to try and contact the person by various mediums, email, phone, even getting a courier to send a letter to them. And I think if they are in Auckland or are subject to lockdown, you would be wanting to take into consideration the reasons why they haven't engaged or turned up for work, and looking at ways as how you might support them. But if there's no engagement at all, yeah, you'd need to follow that same employment process before you take any action in terms of dismissal or terminating your employment.
Any comment from anybody else?
I just agree. I mean, we do have that happen. I have had that happen with other employers, and exactly that. It's incredibly hard at the moment with people. They are disengaging and just walking away from things, which is not so good.
Yep. One here from Terry. Does New Zealand have any particular forums or channels for sharing good practice or continuous improvement in terms of good workplace mental health?
I think there are a few around, but I know our mental health and wellbeing advisor is involved in a couple of them. But I might see about what she's got, and I'll send that on to you, Philip.
I put up on their website, so it's presentations and the recording up on their website. So if you've got any more of us, if you need any leads, we can add it to the list.
I mean, the HASAN's conference coming up 8th and 9th of November has got a number of good presentations in that area.
Yep. Good plug, John. Checks in the mail.
Can I also make I think I did mention it in passing that at WorkSafe we have just completed a piece of research on what good looks like, and this has involved interviews with 30 workers, and as individual interviews, and 30 workers who have participated in focus groups, and the workers have come from healthcare, manufacturing, and somewhere else, construction, oversampled Mali and Pacific. We've got younger workers and also some immigrant workers to talk to us about what good looks like. So rather than having a focus on how work can harm us, they've focused on how work can when it's done well, can make a positive contribution. On the basis of that, to their lives and to the lives of their whānau and their community. On the basis of that, what we've got the researchers develop some personas for us that we are currently in the process of getting actors to present. So we have some stories about what good practice looks like, what happens at work that is good, and it's interesting that it's associated with what John was saying, that actually having good co-working relationships, particularly good co-working relationships with your line manager, has a really positive contribution. That being recognised and rewarded has a really positive contribution. So in the mentally healthy workspace, what we're trying to do is to build some resources around exemplary practice, and it's not just about compliance, but it's about what excellence in these areas looks like. So potentially one of the developing channels or sources of information about what good looks like could well be the WorkSafe website, where we're putting a focus on developing those resources.
Yeah, thanks,
John. It might be useful to share just where WorkSafe is in terms of the best practice guidelines and the international standards that have been released recently, if people aren't aware of those.
Okay, so very quickly, in if you're looking at physical health, where it's possible to develop metrics about exposure levels to gases and things like that WorkSafe can under the legislation develop regulations. Clearly in mentally healthy work, it's very difficult to develop those sorts of tools. So what they've done in New South Wales is develop a code of practice, and that it aligns very closely with the Canadian and Australian standards, and subsequently with ISO 45003. Where we're up to is developing our own, starting development of our own code of practice around psychosocial well-being in the workplace, with an idea to help businesses understand what their minimum level of obligations are, but also how they build on that. So to be much more explicit, I guess, and not leave it quite so floating in the air about what minimum compliance and good practice looks like in this area. Is that what you are thinking about, Olivia? Yeah. So we're starting work. It takes a little bit of time to develop a code of practice because it requires a different level of approval than just internal WorkSafe approvals. So keep your eye on the space. It will be coming in due course, I hope.
Great, thank you for that. And there was a question about good practice guidelines too, so that's covered off. So thanks, John. Here's probably a legal one again, or some combination. Someone's not performing their role due to personal circumstances, but an accountant meets demands of the role. If they've been offered a reduction in hours and flexible working arrangements, but they claim the expectations are unreasonable. Essentially, what could we do, I suppose, even though expectations are in line with other businesses? So basically, they're struggling in their role for personal reasons.
Yeah, well, it would be looking at the organisation, what further reasonable accommodations can you make and how long can you offer those for, where they don't have an impact on the business, essentially. How long can you keep that reduced role on offer for them or provide additional supports? It becomes very difficult because then it has a negative impact on actually others who then have to carry the load. The timing of that, whenever you're looking at medical incapacity cases, which this might fall under, it's quite a long process to go through. We're talking at a minimum 3 to 6 months to get to the point of where you would actually be contemplating having discussions around, well, can you carry on in your role, and you need to, look at other opportunities.
It sometimes even goes on longer, which is, because things
12
get
months.
better, things get worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredibly, it's complex.
Judy, what would an employer could do in that situation? Obviously, there's a work balance, but also looking after your staff is important. What would
it's making sure that they've got the right. Actually, one of the interesting things I've done a bit of work about is lately is about neurodiversity, which is John Eatwell could talk about, which is people. It's getting the right people in the right roles, and I think often with the kind of employment we've got at the moment, that often people take roles that are not right for them, but just because that was there. And then so that's one thing. It's making sure that the person feels supported and the manager feels supported as well. I think management need to feel some sort of support that they are doing the right thing. I think it gets really complex, and having tending to use occupational assessments, which is actually quite good, is quite a good way of taking it out of the actual, we often have meetings with an occupational physician, HR manager, the person, their support person, and we have a look at how that is and have some robust discussion about what works best, but it isn't easy, no.
Cool.
I think that's the other good point really is to get the professional opinion, so get a psychologist or somebody to actually what is the back to work plan, what are they capable of, what would help, rather than trying to work it out yourself.
Yeah, it's well worth them, a bit of extra money to do that.
There's one question, this is probably a final one for you four, is earlier in the presentation there was a mention of monitoring people's mental health as part of monitoring health generally, and this was linked to how workers go home from work and take that with them.
Oh,
so any points on that?
We are actually looking at that at the moment, and there's actually, this is buyer beware again. There's quite a number of apps around which employees can, and then it provides a report to the employer. There are some of them that are frightening. The privacy aspect of them is something that Olivia would have a real field day with. It really is, but there are other ones that are actually very well research based. So there are some good things out there that you might like to have a look at. Somebody suggested Good Yarns. There's also Channel, which is another one that we've had a look at, and there was another one that came up the other day. So there are some really interesting, that's a new area that's coming up.
Great, thanks for that. Practices, I'll do a very 1 minute wrap up at the end, but is there anything, one key thing from each of you want to push or emphasise from your presentations or from today?
I'd just like to push that people get a good trusted professional in their organisation, somebody they can ring and contact. It's like having a lawyer. You need somebody who's there for your house as well.
Cool. John?
Yeah, I would, we put a big responsibility on leaders to set tones within the organisations, but mental health and well-being is something that affects everybody, and it's everybody's responsibility in the workplace, but you can't expect people to take responsibility for it if you don't empower them. So it is about providing resources around this, and conversations, talk. The Mental Health Awareness Week theme this year is take time to call it all. Take time to communicate, engage, talk to people, listen carefully. Yeah.
Great.
And I'm probably following on from that. I think a lot of organisations invest money in wellbeing programs and things like that, but without actually the line managers looking after them and them being empowered and them feeling they own this and that the organisation cares about them, I think they often fall over. So I think the first step is how are you genuinely looking after your leaders to get in a good headspace, and then your wellbeing program becomes a tool for them to use rather than something additional that's causing them stress and that they have to do. So I guess that would be my thought piece. get the order right. Yep.
Olivia?
Yeah, mine are along the same lines. I suppose that John Eatwell, it's putting the oxygen mask on those who then need to help others first. But mine's the conversation. I think there's a lot of hesitancy in this area as to where do we start. It's overwhelming. Who do we engage with? But it's actually just having the courage to let's start the conversation and not be afraid of where that might lead us all to.
Great, thank you for that. And thank you for the speakers. Olivia, John, and Judy. So from my point of view, there's some really good things coming out of the session today. There's Olivia talking about fixing the wires. So you don't leave things, in a physical sense, we don't leave them hanging around. If there's some sort of health or mental health things, don't leave them lying around either. The importance of culture, the importance of the relationship with the line manager and the coaching, the leader's positivity, and I think pick up on Judy's point, you know, importance of what sort of program or people you have involved in your business. Make sure it's research led and led by qualified people. So in summary, thank you all today, and thank you to the speakers again, and hope you've learned a lot. And as I said, earlier piece, the presentations and recording will be up shortly. Talk to you soon.